In South Africa's so-called trial of the century. On this, day 2, witness Michelle Berger was pushed to tears after 5 hours of cross-examination by Barry Roux. When she was asked by the prosecution to remember the night Reeva was killed, she broke down.
You see what I mean? I can take you to all the other paragraphs as well. It's striking.
Milady, that's what I heard, and I'm glad to hear my husband heard exactly the same.
I'm afraid that is not too honest. You know what he's saying. It's not glad to hear. It's not new. You know that.
So I did not read this statement.
Yes, of course not. Of course not.
Your emotions at the time of the making a statement, how did you experience it?
There's two things. First thing first.
It was quite raw still.
It was quite?
Raw emotion.
A raw emotion. And would Captain van Aert have seen your emotions?
He witnessed it.
What did he witness?
It was awful to hear a shout before the shots.
Madam, I know that you're emotional now. This is almost done. I'm going to ask you one more question, and I also want to get you out of there. I really also want to. So, how did you express your emotions when Captain van Aert took down your statement?
I told him everything I heard. And then I said to him, it's very difficult for me. When I'm in the shower, I relive her shouts.
Well, for a closer look at what today's testimony might mean for the defence and for the prosecution, we're joined now by legal analyst Brenda Wardle in Pretoria. Brenda, how do you think Michelle Berger actually coped in the end, looking at all her time in court, coped with the defence attorney Barry Roux's cross-examination?
Well, I think from yesterday going through to today, she coped very, very well. I was actually a bit shocked because I hadn't expected, her to be re-examined by Gerinel for the prosecution on her emotional state. And, when I realized what was happening, because I was sitting right in the back of the courtroom, I then saw another side or another element to this, which was basically missing. During Barry Roux's cross-examination, he was very clinical. He harped repetitively on many of the points to try to get her to concede, but I think she managed very, very well under pressure. And it was sad. I saw a few tears in the end when she broke down and cried.
Now, Barry Roux said today that he was dealing with two issues, credibility and reliability. How do you think he did today?
Indeed. Well, I don't think he went very far. You must remember that he handed into the record copies of the statements for Michelle and that of her husband. And he tried to suggest that the one statement mimics the other, and therefore insinuating that Michelle must have had access to her husband's a statement when she opposed to her own affidavit. But she explained that it was the captain from the police services, Van Aert, who essentially took down her version of the events. And she pointed out to differences in the statement.
Nevertheless, though, we've started to hear the testimony from her husband. Barry Roux hasn't had a go at it yet. That will obviously be, that will happen tomorrow. Do you think he'll be able to see similarities between what her husband said and what Michelle Berger has told him previously?
Well, from the examination in chief, it is pretty clear that what they say basically, you know, those two there are so many similarities in what they were testifying about, even though the husband, Mr. Johnson, didn't complete his testimony today. But the evidence that he led in chief today was similar, except, for example, the number of shots. He assumed that 6 shots had been fired, and he learned later that there were actually 4 shots. And he said he didn't keep count, and it happened so quickly that he couldn't quite remember how many shots were fired.
Brenda Wardle, thanks very much indeed for joining us. The trial of Oscar Pistorius, which has entered its 3rd day. We can go back live to Pretoria and join legal analyst Brenda Wardle. Brenda, the day seemed to be dominated with actually testimony from one of his lesser charges. Why do you think they chose to go to the lesser charge, that of discharging a gun in a public place?
I truly cannot state why the prosecution opted to go that route, because today, the major part of today was basically dealing with the negligent discharging of a firearm in a restaurant in Melrose Arch. The day obviously started off a bit dramatically with Advocate Gerinel stating to court that Advocate Barry Roo had given out the number of the one of the witnesses, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson was inundated with calls, even reports of intimidation, messages left on his cell phone, etc. And then Barry Roo then dug into Mr. Johnson throughout the morning, and basically saying there were too many similarities between the statements, his statement and his wife's statements, Michelle Berger's statements, as well as what wasn't in the statement but was basically advanced in court. And then Mr. Johnson alluded to the fact that he had actually made notes, and that is how he could remember, especially when he was asked about the fact whether the last shot, he also agreed with his wife that the last sound he heard was shortly after, seconds after the last shot. And Barry Roo then said, well, bring us the notes, can we have it? And he says, well, I saved it onto PDF, I saved it eventually on my iPad, and they want that evidence brought to court as well. And immediately thereafter, Gerinel then jumped to charge 2, which is the discharging of the firearm.
Indeed, let's go back to that testimony of Charles Johnson. I mean, Barry Roo said, yes, for witnesses to be considered reliable, they must maintain strong independent versions, and he said, you failed that, Mr. Johnson. What is Barry Roo trying to do? Drive a wedge or actually joining the two together? What ultimately is his plan?
I think his plan is to discredit both witnesses, both testimonies, because both of them are arguing that they heard gunshots. Now, I think that they are damned if they agree, they are damned if they don't agree, because at one point he said to him, but your wife says she woke up hearing screams, and you are now telling the court that you woke your wife up, and where they do agree. So all he's trying to do is basically drive that wedge and put it to the court that their testimony shouldn't be trusted.
Indeed. I mean, it's early days, but do you think he's going a long way towards creating reasonable doubt?
Well, I don't think so. With Michelle Berger, it was a bit different. She stood her ground. With Mr. Johnson, it wasn't that clear. I found that he's going to, he'll be problematic for the state's case, if I can actually put it that way. So with Johnson, definitely doubt will come out. And I think when Van Aert, the investigating officer, comes to testify, he'll have to state why there are so many similarities in the two statements.
Brenda Wardle in Pretoria, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Legal analyst Brenda Wardle, who is in Pretoria. Brenda, how difficult has Dr. Stipp's testimony made the prosecution's case?
Well, he hasn't made the prosecution's case difficult. I think he's made the case of the defense difficult, because he was a very, very a good witness. He was consistent, and he was adamant that he heard two sets of noises, obviously referring to them as gunshots.
Indeed, but 3:17 a.m. is apparently the crucial time, which would be after the first noise that he heard. He heard the first noise, then he heard the screaming, and then at 3:17 he made a phone call. So they were able to triangulate that, weren't they?
Well, in a manner of speaking, yes. And I think in the end, this case is going to boil down to the time. But we must remember that there were 4 shots. And it's actually a common cause that the 4th shot was the fatal blow to the head. Otherwise, she really wouldn't have been able to. And there was some deliberation between Advocate Barry Roux and Advocate Gerinel for the state. Advocate Barry Roux saying, well, this is a fact. And Gerinel saying, it's not a fact. That is Oscar's version. We all are in agreement that there were 4 shots. The first 3 shots could not have caused her death. It is the final shot at 3:17 that was actually critical. So the screams and the gunshots that the doctor heard could actually have been the earlier ones, because remember, he said he heard 2 or 3 shots. He was awoken by gunshots.
Indeed. Now, the defence did a sound test on the 21st of February. How admissible is that, and how realistic is that?
Well, it is admissible, because I assume the prosecution or the state were basically aware of the sound test, and the witnesses who came in hadn't been prepped. Even on the day that the sound test was done, which was 21st of February this year, they weren't aware. So Estelle van der Merwe is the first witness who went on the stand and said, well, when was the last time you heard gunshots? And she said, first it was the 14th of February last year, and then the 21st of February 2014. And at that stage, all of us were taken aback in the gallery, because we thought, where is this going? And she said, well, the lights went on, I heard arguments, I went out, I saw a white SUV, and then it pulled away and the noise died down. Almost similar to what the doctor testified about today.
Now, it also emerged today of another bungle by Hilton Botha, who was the original investigating detective. Take us through that.
Now, do you know, Hilton Botha didn't only investigate, he wasn't only the investigator in this current case. Apparently, he had investigated another case against Oscar Pistorius. And what I find a bit curious is the fact that a person who is as experienced as Hilton Botha would contaminate a crime scene by walking in there with his shoes, take some of the real evidence in the trial and leave that in his office, and go and ex post facto add a certification of a statement that was not even a sworn statement. In my view, that was done in fraudum legis, and my only suspicion could have been Hilton Botha wanted to defeat the ends of justice. What the motivation is, I really do not know, and we should perhaps ask who would benefit from that defeating of the ends of justice by Botha.
So will he be called to give his testimony and by the defence or the prosecution?
He's on the list of witnesses for the state, and I wonder if the state would still call him, because remember that the defense, even in the Section 115 plea explanation, explained that they will go out and show that evidence was tampered with, the crime scene was compromised, etc., etc., etc. So at this stage, I do not know whether Gerinel, especially in view of the testimony by Dr. Stipp today, will actually still call him in as a witness.
Brenda Wardle, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We can go live now to Pretoria, and Brenda Wardle is a legal analyst in South Africa, and she's going to help us take a look at this first week of the trial. Brenda, would you say that this has been a better week for the prosecution or for the defence?
I think it's been a better week for the prosecution, but I say that with a little bit of reservations because it has been the prosecution or the state that is leading their witnesses. So whenever you are leading your witnesses, you present the best side. However, it might turn out that when it's Barry Roo's turn to present evidence on behalf of Oscar Pistorius and his witnesses, that they too might come up with counter allegations, etc.
Now, looking back on the week, whose evidence do you think has been the most compelling?
Do you know, the most compelling evidence, I would say Michelle Berger and Dr. Stipp. But having said that, there's such confusion around the timing. Because what happened today is that the security manager, Peter Barber, actually testified about the fact that a security guard reported to him that he heard shots at 2:55. And we know that the state is saying that those shots were fired around 3:17. And Dr. Stipp and Michelle Berger and her husband, Charles Johnson, also give a different time. So I think the prosecution and the defense just need to set out a timeline so that one can actually put these in perspective. But we do know that between 2:20 and 3:30 on that fateful morning, that is when the shooting and all other events that will still unfold during evidence occurred.
What about the other key issues, the screams, the gun culture, his anger?
Now, the anger, you know, the ex-girlfriend argued in court today that when he is angry, he screams. He did get angry with her. He did get angry with her sister, with his best friend, that he screams and that he screams like a man. And the prosecution was saying, well, you've never ever, not at your bail application, not in your section 115, did you ever say you scream like a woman when you are anxious. But then he says he feared for his life at that stage, or Advocate Roo advanced that he had feared for his life, and hence he shrieked like a woman, and they are going to lead evidence in that regard.
Now, why are they running the lesser firearm charges concurrently with the murder charge?
I think that is what the prosecution could be trying to do there, is to create a picture of an Oscar Pistorius who is trigger happy. You know, and the witness today, Taylor, she went ahead to say he pointed a firearm at a vehicle that followed them. He shot up through the sunroof. Obviously, he denies both those claims, but they are just trying to prove that he is prone to violence and using firearms.
Now, looking at the week, what blunders have been made?
Well, I think the blunders on the side of the defense, I would say when Advocate Barry Roo examined Mr. Johnson, and he was basically arguing that they must have sat together with his wife, discussed the statement, etc. And when he insisted on the notes that Johnson had made, I don't think he had actually, you know, he was hoping that those notes would reveal that what he testified about later and what was in his affidavit was actually incorrect. And that would be from the defense's side. From Gerinal's side, I couldn't understand what was her surname again? I think Kruger, Michelle Kruger. But Kruger went on to say that Berger, not Berger. I think it was Kruger. But Van der Merwe, sorry. Van der Merwe is the witness. I'm terribly sorry. But Van der Merwe essentially said she heard sounds, and then her husband said to her, it's gunshots. And after he said that it is gunshots, she heard a cry. It sounded like a woman, and her husband said that that was Oscar's cry. because that definitely then just goes with the version of the defense. So I couldn't understand why he would lead her on that evidence.
Indeed. Brenda Wardle, thanks very much indeed for joining us.